Hello, this is Dr. Farina King, and I'm an assistant professor of history and an affiliate of Cherokee and Indigenous Studies at Northeastern State University. And today we are talking with Dr. Mary Klann, who is a Ph.D. in history and a friend of mine. We've known each other now for several years through different history-related organizations. And we are a part of a group that meets regularly every month to talk about Native American history issues and different studies, dynamics going on. Dr. Klann was gracious enough and kind enough to meet with us today for this talk series and podcast series for NSU community health and well-being. But this talk is not just for the NSU community. It's about ungrading, an important topic related to university-wide issues of grading community health and well-being. So we hope that this talk will be shared widely and that more conversations will spark up about this. We recently had a webinar co-sponsored by the Pacific Coast branch of the American Historical Association and had a great turnout for that, and several people registered. So we wanted to record part of that presentation in some way, more of the conversation we're having now. And so I'll have Dr. Klann please introduce herself, share a little bit about her background. How did she get involved in these kind of conversations and efforts related to teaching? And then we'll continue the conversation from there. So Dr. Klann, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So my name's Mary Klann. I live in San Diego, and I am an adjunct lecturer at 3 different institutions there. So I teach at 2 community colleges and at UC San Diego, which is a R1. And I've been teaching now for 4 years as a full-time adjunct. And it's been pretty recently that I've fully taken the plunge to ungrade all of my classes. So I started it in the fall, but it's something that I've been thinking about doing for a while. And that's related to partly all of my my own insecurities about grading. And how as a instructor, you have like however many student assignments you have to grade at any given time. And it was always really, really stressful for me to do that. I would always procrastinate to the last minute, and I would be super overwhelmed with all the stuff I had to do. I found myself not giving a lot of attention to like students at the bottom of the pile as opposed to people at the top. And it was just sort of the worst part of my job. And I really love teaching, and so wanted to find a way to make it more fun, the grading aspect of that. So I can talk more about that.
Awesome.
If you want,
Yeah. Could you tell us first off, what is ungrading? Some people are just, thrown off by that term. Yeah. And what does that mean?
Yeah.
Does it take down the grading system, or what is it?
Burn it down. Exactly. No, ungrading is it's not, it doesn't have a firm definition. I would say it's a movement of instructors from all levels of education. So K through 12, all the way up to higher ed. And the idea is to decenter or not have grades kind of at the center of our relationship with students and of the goals of the classroom. So if you think about grading is such a normal part of school, like we've all been graded and evaluated ever since we were in kindergarten all the way up to now, and you might be still evaluated in your job in some way. And done a lot of reading and research from educational psychologists, from veteran teachers and instructors, thinking about what grades actually do for student learning and what they don't do. So the ungrading kind of movement or a group of people that are trying this they really want to interrogate the role that grades play in classes for all participants. So what would it mean if students were more on learning for the sake of their own desire to learn rather than to achieve a certain grade in the class? And what would it mean for professors or instructors to get to engage with student work without assigning them like a judgment or a rank or a grade, a letter grade or a numerical grade. So that means like less competition between students, less focus on like, I got this A, now I'm done. I can move on to the subject. There's like more freedom, more engagement with the material. It's just really kind of interrogating what grades can do to student motivation, and then how we can change that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How did you learn about ungrading and started to experiment with it, practice it? And then when you started to, how did that start to take off for you, started to work for you?
Yeah. So I first learned about it from Jesse Stommel, who's written a lot of public writing, like blog posts and also public publications. He is a instructor in, I think he does writing and film studies, but he's also really big in like teaching and learning scholarship. And he has a whole like bibliography of what to do if you're thinking about ungrading. So I sort of just downloaded the bibliography and like started reading all the things. So one of the other people I've read and really kind of impacted my thought process about it is Alfie Kohn. He's a educational psychologist. And then I started trying to implement little things into my classes before I fully did away with the grades. One thing I did was have students reflect at certain points throughout the term on either a specific assignment or how it's going so far for them. So really just asking open-ended questions. What have you learned so far? What did you like the most? What did you not like the most? Like that kind of thing where they're really just sort of sitting, thinking back, and then sort of explaining what they got out of the class. And that was something that was never graded. Like you just got 10 points or whatever, just added on if you turned it in. And that's kind of what I do now. So I use a system that has been developed by Laura Gibbs. She's also in Oklahoma at University of Oklahoma. She is a veteran online instructor. And she teaches also in English, I think. Can't remember, but she is really generous with her like materials and her approach. And basically what she does is students, once they finish an assignment, they fill out a form on her learning management system is Canvas, where they say like, I did the assignment, yes or no. If they say yes, they get the points. And then everything else, like, so that takes like the logistics of the grading out of her hands. And then she just focuses on giving the feedback. So you just give the feedback without the grade. And it's amazing because what happens is students read the feedback and then it starts to become more of a conversation rather than like skipping the feedback, going to the grade, and then looking back to see how the feedback kind of justifies the grade, which is how I usually had approached it before this.
Yeah, that's such an important point of, what is the purpose of feedback and why are we handling the grading this way or that way, right? But do you still have to submit a grade through the different institutions that you're affiliated with then?
Yeah. So all the institutions I work for used to submit a final grade at the end. I mean, there's some colleges that don't do that. I went for my master's degree at Sarah Lawrence. They just do like these conferences, no grades. And it's very cool. Now that I can reflect on back, I'm like, oh, this was really cool. But for me, what I do is when students fill out those forms, I call them declarations, that automatically sends points to the Canvas gradebook. So they can keep track of all the things they've completed. So basically what they're doing is like, I've completed this, check. This is how I'm doing in the class. I tell them, you need to complete this many points out of this many in order to get an A. Like, so they can decide for themselves what makes sense for them. If that means you need to skip a week of doing the stuff I've set out, it's okay. Like, it's fine. Your grade will be fine. Like that kind of thing. So it's really sort of separates out the effort that they're putting into the assignment. That's something separate than like the check mark. So it's like it gives them the freedom to engage with the assignment with whatever they're willing or able to give that week. So in terms of keep in mind like health, that's something that it's really important. So I tell them at the beginning, some readings you might not be into. That's okay. As long as you're sort of like, you do what you can, you say, I did what I could, I believe you, and then we can move on. It's fine. Then they know that some other readings you might be really jazzed about. You might be willing to engage more with. And it's okay. That's just what being human is, right? You just go through different things with your life. And so I try to incorporate that in rather than punishing them for things that are outside of their control. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that it's not that you're completely throwing out the grade. You're still having to navigate a grading system, but it's a different way of approaching that learning experience. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. If I could not assign a final grade, I think it would be better.
To be honest, yeah.
That's just how it is in like the university system. That's going to take a lot more work than an individual instructor can do. Like I can't just refuse to turn in grades. That would be bad. Like, and partly I think like maybe even making it pass, no pass would be better. Like that kind of like takes off the pressure of trying to fit in those points. But for what it is, with this format that I've come up with, the student work has not suffered. It's not different. It is actually, I feel like, better than it has been in the past because they have a little bit more freedom to really get into the stuff. So it's not like always in the back of their mind, I gotta do at least like 5 annotations on this or make like 2 comments on this discussion board, all these things that are like calculating what they need to do to get the full points. They know that if they do it, they get the points. And I'm never going to take away points for format, like all these things that when you're grading a paper, it's like, you read through, it's like, okay, the ideas are good, but you didn't meet the page limit, or like you didn't put your title in the right place. Like those kinds of things, some people take off points for that. Like all that stuff is like, I did away with that. It was like, I was spending too much time trying to calculate those things. And then it really wasn't getting at the point of the class, which was to engage with all of this material and critical thinking and, all of those things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds like you are really trying to get at what's the heart or purpose of your teaching too. You've made some implications, I would say, about how this is related to health and well-being. But could you be a little more explicit about those kind of connections with the way that you teach and the learning experience involved with what we're calling non-grading or ungrading, rather?
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like there's so much stress in college classes from everybody involved, like from students who are stressed about like doing all the work they need to do at a certain time to get the certain grade because it fits in with their plans. And then if they don't do well in this class, like it's like a lot of pressure because it can really affect your future at the university and even your future past that, if you're keeping a certain GPA or whatever. For professors or instructors, it's stressful to try to grade a bunch of stuff in a certain time frame because you want to make sure you're like getting all this stuff back as soon as you can. And then for me anyway, I used to get so anxious when I posted grades because I knew there were going to be emails coming in, people didn't like their grade or they didn't agree with it that didn't happen to me that often, but I always had that like, ooh, I don't want to deal with this conflict, like that kind of stress. It's really not healthy. And then it also, like, in terms of your mindset and how you approach interactions with students, like speaking as a professor now, you don't want to be somebody who like holds ease for students to pass. Like you're the gatekeeper. They have to pass through certain hoops to get there. And then that sort of puts on this power dynamic in the classroom that I don't believe in. In my research, I talk about like disrupting power, like all this, like I don't want to be that person that they have to please in these like kind of arbitrary ways in order to get the A. Like to me, that's not a healthy cultivate a relationship. And it doesn't do anything for me in terms of my feelings about teaching. Like what I really like about teaching I love it. It's like really when I see interactions with students and they start to put these ideas together and I can have conversations, like those are the things I love about teaching. So I want to really adapt my approach so that I'm maximizing that interaction and minimizing any interaction where I'm punishment. Like, so here's another example. I still have students that email me in a panic. Like I went to the ER last night my back went out. I can't make class. Like, is it okay? Am I going to lose points? I'm like, of, of course it's okay. Like, please don't waste any energy, like worrying that I'm going to like something is going to happen to you because you had like this unforeseen emergency. Like I want to, so it really kind of is incorporated into my whole approach that like taking away any opportunity for punishment or, you know, judgment that's really kind of built in automatically to the way what we tend to teach. Like it's been built into my syllabi for years before, not even really realizing it. So that's one thing that ungrading has forced me to do is really think about those dynamics. And if they're healthy, like, am I learning from the students? Am I giving them the opportunity to teach me about something? Am I getting those conversations? Or is my only interaction sitting there with those papers and thinking, oh my God, this is going to take me so much time. And these papers are so boring and I don't want to do this. And who wants that in your feedback? Like who wants to have that person giving you feedback? I don't. So
I think that's a real powerful point that you're making here of teaching as an exchange as well, right? Reciprocity of teaching, because this gets at the history of teaching and these kind of institutions as well, specifically the history of grading that I have heard you refer to before in the webinar, for example. And teaching and these kind of grading systems have been framed as objective, whatever that means, right? But they have a history and they have where they're coming from. Even I think with math and science, we see this more. I'm excited, you know, with my background in Native American studies to learn about the Dene math circles and the way that people are learning math differently and being open to different approaches and ways of knowing that, yes, people can say 2 + 2 = 4, but there's different ways that people connect with this knowledge and have been practicing and using that. Because I do feel that in this conversation, someone might say, well, that might work for this subject or that subject. But I think what you're raising and bringing up is applicable in many different fields and areas of learning. Would you have any thoughts about that, following up on that?
Yeah, there is. So I obviously teach history and humanities. So there is maybe on the surface a little bit more flexibility kind of built into those kinds of subjects because, well, in some cases you, like I remember history classes that I took in high school that were like, do this multiple choice test and this answer is right and this answer is wrong, which now I do not agree with. But in terms of like science fields or that really are about like getting students to arrive at a particular answer, there seems to be, maybe there would be more difficulty in implementing this, but I actually don't know if I agree that it is more difficult. Like if you're approaching it from the desire to help students want to find some intrinsic motivation to learn. So not that they have to take this gen ed science class to get through their thing and that's their motivation. They just want their passing grade and that's it. Like trying to find it some way where that subject you're teaching connects with their lives, that's relevant to them. That's universal, like across the board, whatever subject you're doing, like that will help you, I think, no matter what. I mean, I've seen a lot of discussion because I'm in this ungrading book club and we do this Twitter chat. So I've seen discussions on the science stuff. And I know people do things where it's like you do assignments multiple times. So it's like you can mess up as many times as you want to show how you got to the final answer, like that kinds of things where you're not just like, you have one chance to get this, we got to move on. That's it. That kind of thing. So kind of building in opportunities for revision, building in opportunities for students to tell you what's the most important thing for them, and then maybe being willing to shift the content that you're covering to fit that. There's one professor, now I'm blanking on her name, but she teaches gen ed science. And she said she does this every time. Like she starts off the class by asking them, what's the science that appeals to you the most? And that means she covers different things every semester. And to me, that's like kind of amazing to be able to do that instead of like rigidly adhering to, nope, in this class we have to do this and that's it. So Yeah, I think, and there's also always opportunity for reflection. So if you build in
Mm-hmm.
a point where you're having students, maybe they have to do some sort of test or lab report or something where there is a step by step they have to follow, because that is the scientific method or whatever. I'm not a science person. That sounds right, right? So then you have also an open-ended question about how they approached it, what they learned from it, like that kind of thing, where you're really wanting to generate that sense of feedback. And then also you could ask them, like, what grade do you think you deserve from this? And then see what they say. I mean, with that question, you're basically giving up some of your power. So you're entering into a negotiation or a conversation. Like they say, I deserve a B minus. And then you're like, well, why do you think that? And that's sort of like that conversation. Sometimes people will grade themselves more harshly. I know that that's kind of my, like, oh, I didn't do that well. Like that kind of like thing that's in your head all the time. But then it helps to have somebody like, no, actually, you met the requirements, so I'm going to give you the like that kind of thing is helpful. So there are ways you can integrate this into fields that are maybe more, where they seem more clear cut. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that, because people can wonder, how is this helpful for me or students and staff in different areas,
Mhm.
different faculty. But
Yeah.
my last question for you is, what if people want to learn more? And do you have different recommendations for them? You mentioned Twitter.
Mhm.
I assume there's other opportunities for them to continue to learn about this. This is
Yeah.
just a taste of it, I can tell.
Yeah. So there is a lot of stuff out there about ungrading, and it's more and more coming. And I think that does actually have something to do with the pandemic and people being more willing to see what's actually working in our classes, and maybe now's the chance to try something new. But there's a edited volume that just came out last fall, called Ungrading. This one. Ungrading, Why
Nice.
Rating Students Undermines Learning and What to Do Instead. And that's edited by Susan Bloom. This collection is really interesting because it has perspectives from higher ed, K through 12. It has science, it has humanities, it has like basically across the board. There's a little contribution from every kind of different field. So that's really helpful. The Twitter thing is actually really useful. So if you just look the hashtag ungrading, you'll see tons of contributions to like the Twitter chats that have happened. There's an ungrading book club that's being facilitated basically through Twitter. People share their questions and the responses, and I think that's actually really, really good resource. And I have so many more in my head that are now disappearing.
No worries. Awesome. You do have your own website? Could
Yeah.
people reach out to you if they have questions or
Yes,
anything
absolutely.
like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So if you go to my website, which is just maryklann.com, you can see like my contact information. Also reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at mcklann, and I can point you to other resources. Like I've only been doing this for less than a year, like fully doing this. So there's other people that have been doing this for decades. So I can point you
Wow.
to those people.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, thank you so much for sharing this. I think it is important, even if you feel like it's been under a year, that you're fresh and have this perspective of that change too.
Yeah.
And then we did have a webinar, as I said, with the Pacific Coast branch of the AHA. And we had a group listed there where we sent some different resources. And even in that webinar, there were conversations about different kinds of technologies. You brought this up before in the webinar that can be helpful with doing this. Like what were some of those technologies mentioned? Wasn't Padlet one of them, for
Yeah.
example?
So part of what needs to happen if you really want to try out ungrading, I think, is not just thinking about like how logistically it'll work, but also getting students to buy in to this. So I found that most students are extremely receptive. People think it's weird because it's like so different from what they've experienced before. So my main goal with every tool I use in the classroom is to cultivate community. So if there's no community, if students don't trust me, if they don't trust each other, ungrading really is not going to work because it really revolves a lot around feedback and being honest with each other and that kind of thing. So I use Padlet is one tool. Then I also use Hypothesis, which is an annotation tool. So these are places where students can share their work or have conversations about other people's like readings or other resources or whatever. And everyone can see each other's comments. So that's one thing I've done. That's a pretty radical change from the way I used to do it, where I would have them each send their thing to me. I would be the only person that would see it and read it. So I also have basically everybody reads each other's stuff all the time. So you're getting feedback and exchange from students as well as from me, the instructor, which is really helpful because students have a lot of expertise and knowledge that I don't have. And so sometimes you get really interesting conversations or side conversations that happen on those discussion-based forums that are really helpful for people as they're working on their projects.
That is so wonderful and exciting to hear about these different kind of technologies we have, different approaches. And like you said, Mary, the pandemic has really turned a lot upside down, but it also gives us an opening to realize we can do better. We can do more. And that is exciting. So thank you for that. And thank you for your time. Wadon. We really appreciate having you on. And like shared already, please check out the Twitter, these different resources, continue to learn and grow. This is just a beginning of these kind of conversations and opportunities. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Dr. Klann.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.